Shalom and welcome to the first program in 2022 of the Ghetto Fighters House Talking Memory online lecture series. Today's program is also the first in a new 4-part series, Rethinking the Final Solution and the Wannsee Conference 80 years later. My name is Medin Shahar and I work at the Ghetto Fighters House as a guide and an educator. I want to welcome our global audience, including friends and colleagues from Holocaust museums, institutions, and centers, Jewish heritage institutions, academics and students from universities, historians, and our many, many friends who attend our Talking Memories series. A special welcome, as always, to the survivors and their families that are with us today. We want to thank everyone for their support and interest in our program, and today especially, we have such a large large number of participants. It's very moving. This series is in partnership with our friends at Liberation 75, Remember the Women Institute, Classrooms Without Borders, the House of the Wannsee Conference Memorial Site and Education Center, the Rabin Forum Chair at George Washington University, and the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center. Yesterday, many of us were following the news as 4 hostages were held by a gunman for 11 hours at Congregation Beth Israel in Colleyville, Texas. Congregation Beth Israel is part of our Western Galilee and Central Area Consortium Partnership Together community. We are all so grateful to the local law enforcement that was able to safely remove all 4 hostages unharmed. The rabbi of the congregation, Rabbi Charlie Citron Walker, was among the hostages. The rabbi is known for promoting interfaith peace and conversation, bringing churches, Islamic centers, and synagogues together. As tomorrow marks the 35th Martin Luther King Day, I would like to quote this great man in reference to Rabbi Citron Walker. The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy. Martin Luther King's work is far from over, and Rabbi Citron Walker is definitely carrying on King's message and an example of his faith and belief in humanity. And now I would like to invite my colleague, Dr. Tamir Hod, to give the opening remarks for the series and today's program, the Wannsee Conference, 90 Minutes of Bureaucratic Evil. Tamir, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Medin, for your moving opening. And also want to welcome our audience. We're very thankful for you for joining us. And I want to thank Medin also for working together to bring this series alive. Actually, I think, and I was talking about it with Medin many times, I think it's one of the series that consider most important and complex that we have developed in the International Talking Memory series, dealing with a subject related to World War II and the Holocaust will always demand from both the speakers and the audience to coping with a difficult history and confront many facets of abyss that human society experienced and was revealed. It also forces us to face the constant warning signs and the possibility that what happened might happen again. I'm listening a lot to what Professor Yuda Bauer has to say, and one of his sentences actually present this in a painful, simple, logical argument. He said that if any event occurred, it is a sign that it is possible, even if the repetition is not identical, some of its components may repair. In fact, our preoccupation with the Holocaust can in this context be interpreted as a constant concern for civilization. I think it's what we are doing in this series, in other programs that you are showing here. If we know that lectures on these subjects are always difficult and complex, then this is even more true when dealing with the topic that is at the core of this tragedy, and talking about the final solution. Today, leading historians are still in conflict about the timeline, determining exactly when the final solution began. Despite these discrepancies, historians can agree that during the summer of 1941, there was a tragic turmoil created by the Nazi regime toward the Jewish population that was living in areas occupied by the Nazis. 6 months later, a conference was convened in Wannsee. One of the goals was to organize the streamline the extermination mechanism. Dr. Matthias Hass will expand on this topic, and I would like to thank him sincerely for agreeing to open this series. I would like to explain to our audience why we chose the title Rethinking the Final Solution and the Wannsee Conference 8 years later for this program, and I want to emphasize the term rethinking. It is known that many researchers, including myself, are constantly dealing with the topic, the final solution. So why do we need a timeline? The answer to this question is that since 80 years have passed since conference in Wannsee, we can stop and analyze the materials that has been gathered. Many different perspectives and approaches have been developed in light of the information that has been exposed throughout the years. One well-known example illustrating that the present writes the past is the fall of the Iron Curtain in the late 80s and the exposure of many archives that offer new information about what happened, for example, in the Belzec, Sobibor, and Treblinka extermination camp. We will dealing with these camps in the second and the third program in the series, and I actually can tell for myself that I'm going and about to publish an article dealing with the daily life of the Ukrainian collaborators in Belzec and Treblinka. And many of the documents became available only in the middle of the 90s, some of them even in the last 2 or 3 years. So I think it's a good example to do a rethinking of the final solution. One of our aims is to examine the current discourse regarding to the topic of the final solution and to focus on what has changed concerning what we know about the final solution in the last few years. This issue will be presented throughout the series. This evening, we will hear about the Wannsee Conference. In the following meeting, we will hear about different perspectives of Belzec, Sobibor, Treblinka, and Auschwitz. It was important for us, Medin and I, and all the people that work with us on this series, to bring you this program with a diverse group of speakers from different fields. Mark Bloch argued that danger only exists when every spotlight threatened to illuminate the whole world. Owing to this, we made sure that the series would include historians, archaeologists, writers, and educators so that they can give multiple perspectives of the topics we will be discussing. Throughout the series, our guest speakers will present important and interesting research, including topics that will be discussed in the public for the first time. The Ghetto Fighters House Museum, along with our partners, hope that this program will contribute to an important and meaningful discussion. On behalf of the speakers, Medin and myself, we invite you to join us in this 4-part series. And another few sentences. As for our program today, in the speech that opened the Wannsee Conference, Reinhard Heydrich said those well-known words, and I quote, "During the course of the final solution, the Jews will be deployed under appropriate supervision at a suitable form of labor deployment in the East. In a large labor commune separated by gender, able-bodied Jews will be brought to those regions to build roads, whereby a large number will doubtlessly be lost through a natural reduction. Any final remnant that survivors will doubtless consist of the elements most capable of resistance. They must be dealt with appropriately, since representing the fruit of natural selection, they are to be regarded as the core of a new Jewish revival." We will most likely hear about the significance and interpretations of those words in Dr. Hass' lecture. As for how important the Wannsee Conference was, we can learn from different documents, including the words that Eichmann told his interrogators here in Israel. In this case, the idea is clear, and I quote, "There was no similar committee before or after it, in which such senior people participated. This detail indicates the importance of the committee." Thank you very much, and back to you, Maydin.
Thank you very much, Tamir. And now it is my honor to present today's guest speaker, Dr. Matthias Hass. Dr. Hass studied political science at the Free University of Berlin. His fields of interest are historical foundations of politics and the politics of memory. He is the head of the academic department of the House of the Wannsee Conference Memorial Site and Education Center. He is also working as consultant, lecturer, and educator in the fields of politics of memory, European integration, and international exchange programs. He has worked for a number of organizations, among them UNESCO, the Federal Association for Civic Education, the Cobra Foundation, Amziad, Rhodes Scholar. He is the curator of the traveling exhibition, the Wannsee Conference and the Persecution and Murder of European Jews. He was the director of the US Program of Action Reconciliation Service for Peace in Philadelphia from 2005 to 2009. And over the last few years, Dr. Hass has organized a number of international exchange seminars for Canadian, Polish, German, and American students with different organizations and universities. He has taught at the Free University in Berlin, York University in Toronto, and Touro College Berlin, and worked at several museums and memorial sites to the Nazi past, among them the Topography of Terror Foundation. And thank you so much, Matthias, for coming to speak with us today. The floor is yours.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, friends. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a tremendous pleasure and an honor for me to be here with you today. Thank you to the Ghetto Fighters House and all the other partners for inviting us as an institution, the House of the Wannsee Conference, to cooperate and to partner in this series, and personally to invite me to talk about the Wannsee Conference 80 years later, 90 minutes of bureaucratic evil. And in the context of rethinking this event, and that is something challenging, but I will like to share my thoughts, our thoughts that we had in the last months. And I will start sharing my screen, and that will hopefully work. So I come from the House of the Wannsee Conference. It's the historic site where the work meeting with breakfast afterwards was held. Our focus is the history through the perpetrators and their actions. And our focus as an institution is on education. And I'd like to start with a few words on that. We do many educational programs, and to give you an idea, that's where, if you haven't been there, how the house looks. We do many educational programs with a variety of professional groups, from police and the military to nurses in training, apprentices of chemistry, and of course, school classes. We work with 5 federal ministries and raise questions about professional ethics in history, but also today. And all of our groups, of course, work with the history of their profession during National Socialism and the relevance of this history for them in their fields of work today. And they all address the Wannsee Conference as a key event in the process of persecution and murder of the European Jews. So I will give you an overview of the meeting, some of the participants, and the overall context of that meeting. And in a second part, I will try to present to you an approach that we took in the last months while working and curating an exhibition with the title Involuntary Remembrance on the Significance of the Wannsee Conference in History and the Present Day. We had specific goals and aspects that we think are important to consider in dealing with the Wannsee Conference. And I will give you a few examples how we thought things through, and we think are interesting and new in dealing with the Wannsee Conference today. But let us begin with a general situation, with the historic situation. I will talk about the Wannsee Conference in January 1942. World War II began in September 39, and with that, it was not only from the beginning on a war for territory, but also for the racial new order of Europe. And the main target from the beginning on were the European Jews. And with the invasion of the Soviet Union on June 22nd, 1941, the systematic murder of Jews began. Men, women, and children were murdered by the Einsatzgruppen and the mobile killing squads of police and SS. And by the end of 1941, more than 900,000 people were murdered already. And that is the setting of the Wannsee Conference. On the 20th of January, a meeting took place at Lake Wannsee in Berlin. There was only one topic on the agenda of this work meeting with breakfast afterwards, as it was called in the invitation, and which lasted around 90 minutes only. The final solution of the Jewish question in Europe. How to organize the deportation and murder of 11 million European Jews. Heydrich was the head of the Reich Security Main Office, and he invited 15 officials from the police and the SS, the administration of the occupied territories in Eastern Europe, the party chancellery, and various ministries. Heydrich was authorized by a directive signed by Hermann Göring at the end of July 41 to carry out all material and logistical measures concerning the final solution of the Jewish question. His aim at the meeting was to highlight his leading role in the organization of the genocide, to secure the cooperation of the participants, and to make everybody aware what final solution meant: mass murder. Heydrich's initially planned conference date was December 9th, 1941, and that had to be changed following the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7th, and Germany declared war on the United States on December 12th, 1941. And let us have a look at the situation in Europe at that time. And we see in the middle here the German Reich in the dark blue, and the light blue are the countries, the territories occupied by Nazi Germany. Fascist Italy as part of the Axis in green, and these lilac countries, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, were right-wing authoritarian regimes dependent or associated with Nazi Germany. The continent is ruled over by Nazi Germany. We are winning the war. That's the mentality that these 15 men that come to this meeting bring with them. Yeah, the battle over Britain, it seems a matter of time. The German army is in front of Moscow, and it seems that we can do whatever we want. And that's it. The racial new order of Europe is not finding compromise consensus, but really creating a new world order. And the first and main target are the European Jews. And the decision to murder all the Jews in Europe was probably made during this period. And Tamir mentioned that December 1941, that is a change in the policy. And historians are still debating the concrete date when the decision was made. And there is no key document signed by Hitler that gives evidence, as we, for example, have for the euthanasia killings, the murder of people with disabilities. But we have evidence through a series of meetings and speeches that mid-December 1941 was probably the time when Hitler, in coordination with Himmler and others, made the decision to murder all European Jews. Now, who was at that meeting at that time? And let's have a look here at this, the graph, and we see these men, and if we look what they have in common, it's not much. I mean, these are 15 men. There is one secretary present, and I'll come to her a little later. These are, the average age is 42. They're all from, with two exceptions, middle-class families. We have 11 Protestants, 3 Catholics, 9 Prussians, 2 from Saxony, 1 from Württemberg, 1 from Austria. So a range of backgrounds. Some of them, half of them roughly, or 7 had fought in World War I. 8 belonged to the war youth generation that was too young to fight in World War I. 10 of the 15 men went to university, and 8 of them had been awarded doctorates, which of course was much easier back then, but still, I think it's quite significant. 8 had studied law. Some were old fighters and had joined the party in the 20s already. Some joined in the early 30s, and at the when a ban of joining the party was lifted, they really, the rest of them joined the party in 1937. 9 were members of the SS and sometimes high ranking in the ranks of generals. Some were members of the Reichstag. So we have a sort of average, young, relatively young well-educated, and of course convinced of the Nazi ideology were these participants. But other than that, they're ordinary Germans. So what somebody who was not present is not shown here, but is now found out who that person was a secretary. Why is that significant? It seemed not to be interesting for a very long time. And I think that tells us something about historians and how they look at events. But I think it is interesting to look at somebody being as a secretary, taking notes, writing everything. It is part of the daily work routine. It is a secret meeting, okay, but that was not so unusual. And the meeting was at a different place, but we have a secretary and she took notes. And that is, I think, interesting that the men were here, did that sort of as something they were used to. The woman and an historian, a colleague, did some research in the last year or so, and her name is Ingeborg Werlemann. She was born in 1919, and she was one of the secretaries from the office of Adolf Eichmann and his colleague Günther. She is probably the longest serving in that office, and she was trustworthy, so that Eichmann took her to the meeting, she took the notes, and from that they wrote the protocol. And here, let's have a look now at that protocol that Eichmann wrote. And Tamir already read a few of these paragraphs, but I'd like to point out a few more things so that we can really understand what was mentioned. In the first page or so, pages, Heydrich gives an overview of what happened so far, and the expulsion of Jews, and people had fled, and so on and so forth. And on page 5, we have a typical wording of this document. As a further possible solution, and with the appropriate prior authorization by the Führer, emigration has now been replaced by evacuation of the Jews to the east. However, these operations should be regarded only as provisional options, though in view of the coming final solution of the Jewish question, they are already supplying practical experience of vital importance. So what we see here is that that's typical. There's no wording of shooting, of gassing, of murdering people. But it's very clear immigration has now been replaced by evacuation of the Jews to the east. Immigration is prohibited from Germany, for example, but now we deport people. But the wording is not deportations by evacuation, resettlement. And that means all levels of the administration who are involved in this procedure will not work on something questionable. Oh, what's that? Where are these deportations going to? No, we evacuate people. That sounds innocent. And then they talk about practical experiences of vital importance. And I will come back to that when we talk a little bit about some of the participants and when we are rethinking them. But we have here Mr. Lange, who is the commander of the security police, Dr. Lange, Rudolf Lange, and he's stationed in Riga. And he's brought, together with his Eberhard Schöngard from the general government, occupied part of Poland, to Berlin to talk about their practical experiences. And what their experience is, what the practical experience is mass murder. These are the practitioners of mass murder. They are, and their troops were involved of the mass shootings of Jews in occupied Eastern Europe. So it is very clear that the men who meet at this site in Berlin talk about killing, talk about mass murder, and talk about murdering eventually 11 million Jews of Europe. After page 5 that I just quoted, we have page 7, and Tamir also had quoted that. I think it's important to come back to that. In the course of the final solution and under appropriate direction, the Jews are to be utilized for work in the East in a suitable manner. In large labor columns and separated by sex, Jews capable of working will be dispatched to these regions to build roads, and in the process, a large number of them will undoubtedly drop out by way of natural reduction. And it continues on page 8. Those who ultimately should possibly get by will have to be given suitable treatment because they unquestionably represent the most resistant segments and therefore constitute a natural elite that, if allowed to let go free, would turn into a germ cell of renewed Jewish revival. Brackets, witness the experience of history. So it is very clear from these few paragraphs what these men were talking about. It is very clear that we bring them, we evacuate the Jews to the east, and they have to do slave labor. They build roads and will drop out by way of natural reduction. We work them to death. We really exhaust their workforce, and that is sort of accordingly to the program extermination through labor, Vernichtung durch Arbeit, that existed in the concentration camps. And so the ones who survive that will have to be given suitable treatment. And there is no other way in understanding that than they will be murdered. But it shows us also how these bureaucrats and bureaucracies and the administration function. They don't need to talk everything explicitly and say everything explicitly, but it is very clear what is meant here. And what we have as terms for killing people is Sonderbehandlung, special treatment, also in the camps. And that is the sort of unclear, clear given order to murder people. So it is quite clear what they want to do here. And Eichmann in the trial in Jerusalem even said, oh yeah, the protocol, that's the wording of a document. But during the meeting, they talked openly about wiping out, killing, getting rid of the Jews of Europe. And we can also be sure that they were aware of this if we look at page 6 of this protocol. And page 6 clearly says here how many Jews are supposedly living in Europe. We have 2 categories here. Category A, that are the territories and countries under German control, from Germany, the Altreich, the Ostmark, Austria, to the occupied parts of Europe. And category B, that's either the countries where we have to win the war, see England in the second place there, or where we have to send our diplomats out to negotiate with the government, as in the case of Bulgaria. But altogether and ultimately, the goal is to murder 11 million Jews of Europe. And we see also on this page, we don't see much, it's countries and it's numbers. But we see in the case of Estonia, under category A, it's free of Jews already. So the murder had begun. We have killed the Jews of Estonia. And we have also to be very careful with believing those numbers. We see sometimes very accurate numbers and sometimes very rough. In category B, the USSR, the Soviet Union, says 5 million. But for Ukraine, they say 2,994,684. That's where does that number come from what time? Eichmann, in the preparation for this meeting, had prepared the numbers and had forced often Jewish communities to provide numbers, or from the occupying forces, the administrations in occupied Europe, they got those numbers. But that is the goal, to murder, the planned murder of 11 million Jews of Europe. And coming back to the 3 goals that Heydrich had: 1, securing his leading role; 2, asking for cooperation from the attending ministries and organizations; and 3, making everybody aware of what final solution meant. He had reached 2 of the 3 goals quite easily. His authority was backed by the letter of Göring, and he made everybody aware what final solution meant, in case people were unaware, and even that is highly unlikely. But the 3rd goal was a little more difficult, asking for cooperation for a program of mass murder. How it was phrased in the invitation and during the meeting was Parallelisierung der Linienführung, parallelizing of the procedure. In order to have one procedure for the Europe-wide deportations to the death camps in occupied Eastern Europe, Heydrich needed cooperation. And that is the result of the Wannsee Conference. Everybody was willing to cooperate. Nobody hesitated and looked for a way not to participate in the genocide. Nobody, of course, could have done that probably openly, but there are always ways to play the system. Well, we are overworked, we are understaffed in times of war, etc. Nobody did that. They all looked that their field of work was not effective, but it was not that they were all, but if it was not, if their field of work was not effective, they were all willing to cooperate. And if we have another look, or look at some of the participants, for example, and I just skipped through very fast to come back to coming back to these men. If we take, for example, on the right-hand side, the fourth from the right, Erich Neumann. Erich Neumann is working for the plenipotentiary of the 4-year plan for Hermann Göring. And he is in charge of the slave labor. And that's where he's quoted in the protocol and says, oh, wait a minute, I'm in charge of my slave labor. My Jewish slave laborers you can't have until they are replaced. And Heydrich assures him, no, that's being taken care of, no problem. They will be replaced by civilian slave laborers from Eastern Europe mainly. And then Neumann has no further objections. Martin Luther, the Undersecretary of State from the Foreign Office, even comes with a wish list from the Foreign Office to be involved in this. This is our field of work, and we work with foreign Jews and under German control, or German Jews in foreign countries. And they come and see where it's not problematic at all. So that is very clear. They are willing to cooperate. And the bureaucratic language of that protocol, of course, helped. They don't talk about gassing people, about mass shootings and murder. Everything is described in different terms. And it is clear that murder was meant. So here at Wannsee, the murder of the European Jews was not decided, but it was coordinated by leading bureaucrats, how it was going to be implemented and carried out. The Europe-wide deportations were a central part of it. So the perpetrators who gathered in Wannsee joined their Nazi convictions rooted in racial anti-Semitism with a sober and objective understanding of the bureaucratic profession to create an effective plan for the genocide of the European Jews. The Wannsee Conference signifies the willingness of German state offices to cooperate in the Holocaust. The conference participants became accessories to and perpetrators of the genocide, with several agencies and hundreds of thousands of civil servants and police participating in its execution. So that was a rough outline really about the event itself. One of the important questions for us dealing with this, of course, is what happened to the men who participated, to the participants of the Wannsee Conference. And that is where you already saw that. We see an obituary here of the last surviving participant of the Wannsee Conference. Gerhard Klopfer died in 1986. And if we look at the group, the 15 people, and what happened to them, and the question is, who was tried for participating in this event? The short answer is nobody was ever tried for participating in this meeting. 1/3 of the participants died before the end of the war. Let's take Reinhard Heydrich, for example. He dies in early June 1942, 5 months only after the Wannsee Conference, after an assassination attack on his life by Czech partisans. 1/3 is tried for other crimes. Josef Bühler, for example, the representative from the general government, is handed over to Poland for the crimes he committed in occupied Poland. He's sentenced to death and executed. And of course, the most known is Adolf Eichmann, who escaped to Argentina after the war, where he was kidnapped by the Mossad, the Israeli Secret Service, brought to Israel, tried in Jerusalem, sentenced to death and executed. But 1/3 of the participants was never tried. They were imprisoned for a short time only after the war. And if there was a trial, usually they were sentenced to exactly the time they had already served and were let go free. They lived integrated into post-war society in Germany. And Dr. Klopfer's family had the obituary in the paper, and he died. They're mourning who had died. Gerd Klopfer died after a fulfilled life for the well-being of everybody under his influence. That's what the family in a regional southern German paper published. And at that time, that caused a scandal in West Germany, because at that time it was clear what the Wannsee Conference was. But it shed some light also on the way society did not want to deal with its own history of guilt and responsibility for a very long time. And if we talk about the event itself, we need to talk about 80 years later, how in these 80 years the history was dealt with. And that brings me to my second part of my presentation. We were invited to curate an exhibition for the Bundestag, for the German Parliament, on the occasion of the 27th of January, International Holocaust Remembrance Day, and in combination with the 80th anniversary of the Wannsee Conference, we combined that. But we didn't only want to do an historic exhibition about the Wannsee Conference, but also about the aftermath and the difficulties to remember. We wanted to rethink where we are today. And that's why we came up with this title, Involuntary Remembrance, on the significance of the Wannsee Conference in history and the present day. And for us, three aspects are important when we reflect on this event. It is important to connect January 20th, 1942 to the history after 1945 and show the relevance of this history until today. And this obituary is just a little example of that. And part of that is also to ask how our understanding of the meeting at Wannsee, the meaning we give to that meeting, also shaped our image of the Holocaust altogether. The second aspect is that we are thinking, and I think it's important to have a multitude of perspectives. We did not only want to reproduce the perspectives of the perpetrators while talking about the Wannsee Conference, time 33 to 45 altogether, and possibly even the time after 1945. We do not want to exclusively to talk about these 15 men, their mentality and their actions. One focus must be to consider the perspective of the victims. Ultimately, the meaning of the meeting at Wannsee can only be understood by reflecting on the perspective of Jews, men, women, and children. And for us, at a site of the perpetrators, one of the central sites of the perpetrators, I think it's important to recognize that even their actions can only be understood with reflecting on what their actions meant for the victims, the people who were persecuted. And the third aspect is that we think about different sources that reveal the history to us. And going back to ego documents from the victims and the perpetrators from the time of the historic events themselves, but also from post-45. We need also to reflect on the debates of the decades after 1945, the different controversies around the meaning of the history of the Holocaust, to be able to understand where we are in the year 2022. And I will, here you see how this exhibition looked in the German Parliament building, just to give you an impression. And you see, yes, it's a lot to read, but I think it's try to present different perspectives. And I would give you one example that shows a little bit the different aspects that we want to consider. And I come back to Rudolf Lange for this, the commander of the security police who attends the meeting at Wannsee and probably talks about his practical experience, most likely. He was born in 1910, studied law, and was awarded a doctorate degree. He joined the SA in 1933 and the SS and the Nazi Party in 1936. He had a career with the Gestapo in Berlin and Vienna and Stuttgart. And after the invasion of the Soviet Union, he became an officer with the Einsatzgruppe A. He was the commander of a murder squad that killed thousands of Jews in the Baltic states. On the 19th of January, 1942, the day before the meeting in Wannsee, Lange oversaw the mass shooting in Riga of some 1,000 Jewish men, women, and children from the Theresienstadt Ghetto. He flew to Berlin later that evening and attended the Wannsee Conference, and we have to be clear, really with bloody hands. And he was somebody directly involved in the murder, and he was able to report at the Wannsee Conference on the practical experience on the ground. But we have also somebody else here. We see Max Michelsen on the right-hand side here, and he is the son of Jewish merchants born in Riga in 1924. After the Germans invaded the Soviet Union in July 41, his mother was picked up and taken away by Latvians, and he never saw her again. Max and his father were forced into the ghetto, and his father, Dietrich Michelsen, was murdered during a large-scale shooting operation in the nearby Rumbula forest on the 8th and the 9th of December 1941, probably by the police forces under the command of Rudolf Lange. Max survived the dissolution of the ghetto in 1943 and was sent to other concentration camps. Finally, eventually was liberated and later immigrated to the United States. So we have clearly these two stories connected, and there is other important topics that they refer to. The murder had begun already before the Wannsee Conference. Lange, and you see that's from a report that's Rudolf Lange sent to Berlin, that in December, 27,800 Jews were executed in Riga. Lange is one of the perpetrators, and Max Michelsen's parents were both murdered in December 41. So the image of the Wannsee Conference as a meeting where the Holocaust was decided upon, and that comes back oftentimes, that's where things were decided, which of course it wasn't, because the people who meet there are not the political decision makers. These are the permanent secretaries in the ministries, not the ministers. But we can question that by discussing the events through the actions of Rudolf Lange and what happened to Max Michelsen. And I think also Max Michelsen's quote, "We were dead already before the Wannsee Conference," is quite a powerful statement in this context about the experience that people had in the second half of 1941 already. And I would like to add another component, and that is where we see here a photo of Slama Berwiner, a young Polish Jew who was deported to Kulmhof in early January 1942. Kulmhof began to operate as a death camp in December 1941. And he was assigned to the Jewish work detail that had to take the bodies of the Jews who had been murdered in the gas vents to a nearby forest and bury them there in mass graves. On the 19th of January 1942, again, a day before the Wannsee Conference, he managed to escape. In Warsaw, he gives a report about the mass killings. And Berwiner was taken then to Zamość, and a few weeks later, the Germans deported him from the Zamość ghetto to the Belzec death camp, where he was murdered at age 30 in April 1942. So on that same day, the 19th of January, the day that Rudolf Lange oversees the murder in Riga, Slama Berwiner escapes from Kulmhof. In Warsaw, he gives a report to Herr Schwasser, a member of the Oinik Shabbos, the Ringelblum archive. And this is the first account of the mass gassing of Jews. And we see a part of his report here in the presentation as well. Herr Schwasser, who Wiener gives his report to, survives the war. And after the war, and we see him here on a photo with Rachel Auerbach, they are here on this photo discovering parts of the Ringelblum archive. What is important for us here is to recognize that this is not only we discovering these events, and there is the report of Slama Berwiner, but that's part of already the question, whose history is it? And that is, I think, also the quote, and that's a quote from Rachel Auerbach, that why it's very important. All Jews should know, whether they wish to know it or not. Every effort should be made to communicate the truth to the non-Jewish world too. We have to tell our story. We must know. We need to facts. And Auerbach's approach of writing our history, the history of the Jews of Europe, written by Jews themselves, is relevant for us. Whose history is it? Who writes history? And what we can clearly say is that on the side of the perpetrators, on the side of German society after 1945, there's a clear unwillingness to confront this history and to write this history in a self-critical way. But there's also a connection, and I'll continue with this, that brings us even to Wannsee. Within the group of the Jewish Historical Commission in Warsaw that discovers the Ringelblum archive, and we see another photograph in the background here, we see Josef Wolf. Josef Wolf was born in Chemnitz, grew up in Krakow. He was deported to Auschwitz in 1943. He survived the death march, and after the end of the war became an employee of the Central Jewish Commission. He was involved in the retrieval of the first part of the Heunig Shabbos archive in Warsaw in 1946. He first lived in Poland before moving to Paris, and finally he settled in Berlin in 1952, where he published the first extensive body of research on National Socialism and the extermination of Jews in Europe. And in the mid-60s, Josef Wolf tried to establish an international documentation center about National Socialism and its consequences at the house of the Wannsee Conference. So there is a clear link from what drove him to our institution. Eventually he failed. There was support for him, but also a lot of opposition to these plans. And it took another 25 years before in 1992, the House of the Wannsee Conference Memorial Site and Education Center is opened. And now today, the library and the media center is named after Josef Wolf. And for Wolf, writing the history of the Holocaust was his life theme. As you see also in the quote by Gerhard Schönberner, a colleague who supported him in his efforts to build a documentation center and became the founding director of the House of the Wannsee Conference in 1992. Throughout his life, Josef Wolf saw it as his responsibility to educate people about the Holocaust. And you see that at the inscription at his desk there, Zachor 6 million, remember 6 million. It's a photo from his office. And that reminds us and reminded him that the murdered and the survivors are not forgotten. But on the other side, you see also you're coming, and that's a quote from an interview with Josef Wolf, you're coming with a Jewish point of view again. That means nothing at all. Look, National Socialism is not a Jewish issue. National Socialism is a German issue. And we see here very clearly that even though writing this history from a Jewish perspective, his history, the history of the Holocaust is quite important, but National Socialism altogether is a German issue. And I think by saying this, he clearly hoped that German society was willing to take on that task and confront itself with his history. And I think that's a hope that was bitterly disappointed in facing German society in the 60s until the early 70s and not willing to confront the own involvement, complicity, and guilt. And Josef Wolf was so disappointed that after the death of his wife in 1974, he took his own life, and in a letter, a famous letter to his son, he said, you can publish books and document the crimes of Nazis and until you're blue in the face. And you might have the most democratic government in the city of Bonn, the West German capital. But the murderers, they wander free and have their little gardens and water the plants. Again, that shows us the dynamics in coming to terms with this issue and clearly also with the Wannsee Conference. So I'm coming to my end. In rethinking the Wannsee Conference, it is important for us to connect the historic events of the history of the Holocaust with the post-war history and our societies today. And I think we can make connections from Rudolf Lange, who was at the meeting at Wannsee, to the victims and survivors, to their testimonies as essential parts for writing this history, and also to the dynamics in post-war Germany in coming to terms with this history, which for a very long time remained involuntary remembrance. And to make these connections with sources from various perspectives and with a broad variety of sources enables us to deal with this history as a really a dense narrative that shows us that this part of history is still relevant 80 years later. Thank you very much. And one little last remark, because of the anniversary of the Wannsee Conference, we have also an international conference. You see here the link to it, which will happen next Wednesday to Friday. You can join also digitally if you're interested. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matthias. And of course, you can put that link in our chat box if people want to join in. I already registered, so great. There it is. Wonderful. So we do have a few questions for you, and I put a few down on a page. Some were actually answered, and some people were having a very interesting conversation throughout. But here are a few of the questions. One of the first questions was asking, is it fair to say that one of the goals of the conference was not only to assert the SS dominance in this affair, but also to bind other agencies, I think you talked about this, to bind other agencies to the final solution so they couldn't back out. And if you agree with this, what agencies would be considered a part of the final solution?
Yes, I think it is fair to say that by putting it out there and being blunt and clear about it and making everybody cooperate is sort of, there is no way out. But I think behind that is a little bit the image of, oh, the police and the SS on the one side and these normal ministries or so, the civilians on the other side. And it is true in parts, but if we look at Wilhelm Stuckart, for example, from the Ministry of the Interior, he also, and we have photos from him in our exhibition, in an SS uniform. So the clear cut, oh, these are the bad guys from the SS, and then we have the more civilian, innocent one. I don't think that really is based in the reality back then. I think they cooperated on many other levels. They were convinced of what they were doing. Wilhelm Stuckart is one of the co-commentators of the Nuremberg race laws in 1935 already. So they are, in the position that they are in, it is very clear that they're willing to cooperate. And what the SS asked them to do is not to participate in the shootings, not in the murder, not in the last part of the crime, but in the sort of orderly administrative part of it. And doing that. And for that, oh, that's their daily routine. That's what they're used to. They're professionals, and they follow their procedures. And I think therefore, yes, I think Heydrich wants to really make it clear what they are participating in, but it's also they are doing this, and they're happy to do that. And the clear cut between these agencies, I think, is not there. One interesting question is, why is the Ministry of Justice there? I mean, we talk about murdering 11 million people, innocent civilians. They must be aware of that in one way or the other. But there are legal issues involved, and that is really trying to get into their heads. We have, and I didn't have the time to talk about that, the minor issue of talking about half Jews and 1/4 Jews, Mischlinge ersten Grades and Mischlinge zweiten Grades, sort of the definition after the Nuremberg race laws. And if they are in mixed marriages and have children, do we deport them, yes or no? And if we do this, what effects does that have? And in general, 11 million Jews of Europe, that's fine. But in these minor questions, suddenly these men have their own opinion. And these are experts, and they say, that might be problematic administratively. Because if we take the Jewish husband away and the non-Jewish wife and the half-Jewish children will stay behind, that family will be torn apart. And there's Aryan blood. I mean, the whole ideology behind blood, but that's there. That's a problem. And maybe from the Jewish wife, her family, the Aryan family, is losing somebody. So this has consequences within majority society that we have to be aware of. If we now deport only the Jewish father, but not the half-Jewish children, we have children losing their father. Again, we have issues here, and we need legal procedure. There is a suggestion to establish laws for forced divorce, to declare, okay, this marriage is over. But that's not so easy. In the German legal system, and I'm not a legal expert, but that's why we need the legal expertise of the Ministry of Justice. And look, we declare we are at war, we have a world war, we are at war with the Jews, and in war, we say everything is allowed, and so that's not a legal problem to murder men, women, children, young and old. But there are legal challenges for them, because that is what they're dealing with. They don't steal the property that's left behind. They find legal mechanism to take over the property. And that is, I think, gives us hints in how they function.
There's a very interesting question. Because of the timing of the conference, someone is asking if you think that, that you view the conference relative to the state of the war. How do you connect the situation of the German army in World War II and the timing of having the conference? Was it planned in the eutrophic celebration of the conquest of Western Europe, or was it planned in desperation to the realization of the losses incurred during Operation Barbarossa? It's all about timing.
and well, again, and that the timing says that, and I think there were people that said, look, we first win the military war and then we have the other wars going on. It is clear at that point, okay, the war will not be over so soon. And then there were people who said, oh, after the winter of 41, it was clear Germany will eventually lose this war. I don't think that these men here are military experts that think that far ahead. Because so far, until then, I mean, this is a glorious war for the Germans. I mean, we are winning on all fronts. Even the war in this half year, being in front of Moscow, really going through the countries, Western Europe in the year before, and then Eastern Europe. There, I don't think they saw coming what was coming, the winter and the winters, and the growing resistance, and the restructuring of the Red Army, and so all of that, I don't think they saw that coming. But they said, okay, now wait longer. No, and I think it's a question of power, of doing things now. The murder had begun. The Einsatzgruppen are under the command of Heydrich, but the higher SS and police leaders, and they are already also involved in that. And if we then talk about Aktion Reinhardt, or the killing of the Jews in the general government, that they do not report to Heydrich. So we have also internal struggles, and I think they use that as a tool in their power fights also, and there are fights for influence, for spheres of that. Do they really look into the military situation too much? I don't think so. They are not. They are SS officers or they are civilians, but I don't think they have the understanding for that. The Wehrmacht is not present at the Wannsee Conference. That's interesting, but a year earlier, Heydrich had lost some of the arguments with the Wehrmacht in who's in charge of what, where, and I think he wants to secure his authority there and doesn't need another strong organization like the Wehrmacht coming in maybe and questioning him. And then others might think as well, right? So I think the way his list of the people he invited is structured also gives us an indication for that. But we don't have this clear, well, again, not the document that says, oh, we are not winning, let's have the meeting. I mean, I think it's significant and it's connected, of course, but there's no clear connection. Let's have it now and not postpone.
Okay. And I think I want to ask one more question. There was a question about what is taught in the German educational system. I wanted to ask how the Wannsee Conference is incorporated, if at all, into educational programs, and are the educational programs at the education center what we call formal education? Schools come to the villa, or is it something outside of the regular school program? Because someone asked about education in Germany, I thought it would be a nice way to end the program with the education.
No, we have the 80th anniversary of the Wannsee Conference. We have also the 30th anniversary of us as an institution, educational site. We are opened in January 1992. And of course, we'd like to believe that our work is very successful and we influence the school curricula and sort of give an insight into this history. And in rethinking this over the last months, what is interesting that until today in many school books and publications and newspapers, we still have this, oh, at Wannsee it was decided to murder the Jews of Europe. And we ask ourselves, why is that? Why is that still? And it seems that people still, I mean, a history that with those dimensions, those levels of violence, of murder, of human suffering, needs to be connected to a time, a date, a place, and a specific group of people. We need that, but we have a process here. We have a process that begins, that continues from different groups. I mean, the IRSS and police leaders and Heydrichenist troops, and we have not the one group. And oh, Hitler, was he at the meetings? Always a question. No, he wasn't, because this is not about decision making. This is about implementation on a huge level of German society at the administration. We have these permanent secretaries there. And this is going down now to the communal level of every town and village to organize when the people are showing up at the train station to be brought to the next larger city, to the trains, and so on and so forth. But so to get your head around that is quite difficult. So we try as humans probably to connect this to, okay, here, this is the place. We do have that also from families of survivors coming there and this is the place, isn't it? And there is, yes, it is an important place. It is, I think, a very significant place that shows the involvement of the administration, but it's a complex history. And to teach that in the 2 hours of history lessons at school is quite a challenge. But I think that the Wannsee Conference is mentioned in school books is something that there is an understanding of this event, of a change, I think, also in policies in that time span. Late 41 to then the spring of 1942. And I think that is something that is probably covered more in schools today than at my time, where we learned, and I was young, and that's quite a long time ago, 33 to 45. And then part of that was the war and the Holocaust. But now I think it's more differentiated. Groups come to us during their regular school, in the regular school system, but we do have educational programs that go for a day or longer, and often that is something extra. It's within the school context, but it's something, an intense learning program. Often we have sort of discussions with teachers beforehand about where that specific class is, what they are working on, what's the topic. We are open to inquiries of different groups. We have groups coming before they go to Auschwitz to do a week-long tour in Poland and really at the sites there. They come to us and learn on a day at Wannsee about the significance of the administration in that, and make a connection between Berlin and occupied Poland and the places of the death camps. And I think it's not that one program that the schools take. We have a federal educational system, so the different states have different approaches to this history. And I think also the numbers of memorial sites in the last 30 years in Germany has grown. We have the third exhibition in our place. And in the first one, it was really a sort of a tour de force through National Socialism. I mean, from the early camps against political opponents to all kinds, it was a history of National Socialism. And that is not the case anymore. I think they are more focused. The memorial sites talk about their specific history in the context of the history of National Socialism, more focused. So it's also, I think, still changing in a dynamics that's happening. I think the post-45 time is becoming more and more relevant, and our new exhibition is more relevant, but also we need to bridge the gap of 80 years and not of 40 years or a little more. But I think that it has become also more challenging. And so we have to find new ways. We have new questions, a new generation with new questions.
Wonderful. And I hope that everything will be open again in the near future. We were just talking about that we'll also be able to come visit in the near future. I know that Tamir also wanted to say a few words before we say goodbye to everyone.
I must say that we have a lot of questions, many questions, and some of them like a bit outside of the line of the discussion. And I can promise you, for instance, a question about the Madagascar plan. So we will talk about it in our next program in this series. Medin collected the questions, Matthias, and I collected the response of the people. And I can say you that everyone found this lecture really interesting. For example, Lisa wrote to you that thank you so much for this outstanding program. And there are many similar responses. So I want to personally thank you for that. It was fascinating. And people asking about the recording, and we didn't give all the details. So thank you very much, everyone.
Yes, thank you for having me. And thank you really for the audience for being so patient with also the technological issues a little bit, but it was a pleasure being here.
And thank you again, Matthias, for your incredible discussion. And many, many people, including educators and academics, said, thank you so much. The rethinking of the Wannsee Conference is going to be now a part of how we teach our students. So thank you for that as well. And I also want to thank again all our partners for helping bring this incredible evening together. We had the highest number of participants. Over 700 people were here with us today. And of course, those that couldn't join us will get a recording in an email. As well, I put in links for our future programs. Anyone who has registered to this program will also get an invitation to those programs within the next few days. So everything is ready, not only in the chat box. And once again, I want to thank our incredible audience. There were survivors in the audience today. And I'm so glad and so honored that they were with us and shared their stories with us as well. And that's it. I'm going to say shalom and wish everyone a good day or a good evening. And we will see you soon.